called to start a church in one of the most rapidly changing communities in Memphis, Tennessee. It was a daunting challenge because of all the change and the destabilization of this community. Hickory Hill was at one time one of the most enviable of all neighborhoods to live in Memphis. People were fighting to get in. It was a plush suburban neighborhood with an Italian garden where you could go get fresh vegetables and fruits, and one-lane roads that snaked through neighborhoods that people died to get in. It was to die for. It was a wonderful community. And then fast forward to a couple of years later, they built a mall. It was called the Hickory Ridge Mall. And in that mall, there was a large carousel that the kids would gather around and play in. It was the beginning of something different. I talked to one well-respected architect in Memphis who said that Hickory Hill was built wrong. It was built for retail and not residence. It was not a place where people could work and play. There was a 4-lane highway that gutted through the residential district with big box retail that littered the road. Target and Best Buy and all these big businesses right next to residential neighborhoods. It worked for a while, but then things started to change. Fast forward closer to 2000, and many of the housing projects in North Memphis and downtown Memphis were shut down. And all of those residents that were living there were moved out and relocated. The suburbanization of poverty, urban sprawl, destabilized the community. And people began to leave the community. Businesses began to leave, leaving behind a trail of empty big box retail. And in 2008, a tornado hit. A tornado hit and devastated. It hit the mall, it hit Rafferty's, it hit Taco Bell, all around our church, but it didn't hit our church. Our church was in a service merchandise building, and I told my staff one day when a reporter took a camera and went to service merchandise, a boarded up service merchandise, and he said, "This is an example of the blight in this community that nobody wants to be a part of anymore. This is why people are leaving." And then with about a couple of thousand members, I told my staff, I said, "That's our new church building." And we took that service merchandise building not because we wanted to service merchandise, but we wanted to serve people. And we stayed in that community, and we anchored in that community because we had a vision for that community. And after 2008, and when the recession hit, and then further people left the community, there was blight. Marina Cove was one time one of the most sought-after places to live, with waterfalls and bridges, and people wanted to live in Marina Cove, but this is Marina Cove. Marina Cove became a place where people were murdered. One particular friend of mine who's a pastor in the community, a Latino family, was home invaded, and the husband was forced to see his wife raped, then shot in the head in front of his daughters. In this apartment complex where people once wanted to live, people were now trapped, and they left, and behind there were boarded up windows and absentee landlords who refused to do right, and so we were left with this blight. And into this community I was called to try to stabilize the community, and we had a vision. God put a vision in our heart to create a kingdom community. What is a kingdom community? A kingdom community is simply a community where people live life as God intended it to be lived. We believe that we can empower the hearts and minds of people and lift them out of the trenches and give them something to hope for. Reggie McNeil, in his book, Kingdom Come, says that kingdom extends way beyond just spirituality, but includes culture, arts, religion, education, politics, the environment, the full scope of human existence and its consequence. That's kingdom. We wanted to establish a kingdom community in a destabilized community, but we knew that we needed some help. We needed help from local partners and local businesses and the local government and the federal government. The government? I know what you're thinking. Church and state. How is church and state going to work together? Isn't there a separation? Well, you know, this separation of church and state has often been a misunderstood and often debated concept. If you go back to England, the early founding fathers left England because of religious persecution, and they came to America to get away from religious persecution. And in their Constitution, in the First Amendment, in Article 6, it specifies that there shall be no establishment of some kind of test to determine who can serve in office based upon religious affiliation. Then Thomas Jefferson came behind that, and he said, I contemplate with sovereign reverence that act of the whole American people that says that there should be no favoritism toward establishing a religion, nor prohibiting the free exercise thereof, thus creating a wall of separation between church and state. Now, Thomas didn't mean for us not to talk to each other. He didn't mean that we couldn't work together for the good of this country to create a perfect union. No, he simply meant what Dr. Henry Cloud, noted Christian psychologist, said. He says we have to create a boundary. A boundary simply shows me what I have ownership for and what you have ownership for, and in knowing what I'm responsible for gives me freedom. And in America, we have freedom from religion and freedom of religion, but we ought to have the freedom to work together. And so we had a vision to work together with the community, but we had to do something about that wall. And I'm reminded in our sacred text in the Old Testament, there's a story of a man named Nehemiah who worked in the public sector. He worked for King Artaxerxes, who was a Persian king who had taken Nehemiah out of Jerusalem as an exile. And Nehemiah was a Jew who worked in a Persian government, and he had the precarious position of being a cupbearer to the king. Now, I'm not sure you want this job. I mean, he got paid good, but I'm not sure you want it, because his job was to taste the wine to make sure nobody assassinated the king. Talk about stress on the job. Hostile work environment. So he's got to taste the king's wine, and he builds relationship with the king, and they begin to trust each other. And this is important because one day, even though Nehemiah is in exile, and by the way, the exiles, what W.B. Du Bois would call the talented tenth, are taken out of their community whenever there's a takeover from one kingdom to the next. The king takes all the talented people and leaves all the poor behind. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Nehemiah was taken out of his community and the poor were left behind, but just because he left Jerusalem, his heart never left. And if we're going to change our communities, those of us who are in privileged positions of power and have relationship with the king ought to have a connection with our community, because nothing's going to change in our community if the people in power forget the people who've been left behind. And so Nehemiah, he's still connected to his community, right? Well, one day he gets word that the neighborhood is in disarray. The walls have been torn down. And mind you, King Artaxerxes is the same king who said that there should be a cease and desist order for the revitalization of the walls being built in Jerusalem, because his advisor says that it would be against your economic viability to allow Jerusalem to rebuild their walls. You won't get their money. And so he stopped the revitalization effort. But here comes Nehemiah, because Nehemiah hears that there's predatory lending, that there's devastation, and there's violence, and there are people having homes invaded, and there's enemies coming in and out, and nobody's able to take care of themselves because the walls have been torn down. And so Nehemiah is sad, and he weeps for his community. And we ought to weep when we see violence in Memphis. We ought to weep when we see kids who can't read at a third grade level and they're in the sixth grade. We ought to weep when we see people who are being taken advantage of by predatory lenders and adjustable rate mortgages, and all the filth that comes into communities because simply they've been left behind because they're poor. It bothered him. And he came to the king with a face that was downcast, and the king said, "What's wrong?" He says, "How can I be happy when my people are in trouble and the gates have been burned?" He says, "What do you want to do about it?" He says, "I want to go back and I want to help." And then he says, what do you need? He says, I need some papers to get some timber to rebuild the walls. I need some army soldiers to go with me because there's violence in the community. I can't work if I'm not safe. I can't eradicate poverty if there's violence in the community. I need some help." And so he sent him all of the resources that he needed, and Nehemiah went back. And what I want to tell you today is that the church has taken a bad rap. Because of fraudulent churches, because of mean Christians, we've taken a bad rap, and the brand of Jesus has been hurt. But the church at its best is a group of people. The word ecclesia in Greek means a gathering of people whose responsibility is to steward the community. We are the ones who are supposed to steward the community. Nehemiah was a wine steward. He tasted what could have killed the king. The church is in position to taste what could kill the community. And because we work with the people who are hurting, we of all people should know. And I know I'm a pastor, but I'm proposing something today. If we're going to help our communities, we need a love triangle. A love triangle, not that kind of love triangle. The public, the private, and the nonprofit need a symbiotic relationship that works together. And I didn't make this up. This came from Congress in 2009 when they came up with the Serve America Act, which promised to give funds to social innovation, where the federal government worked with the private sector who gave funds for the scaling up of social initiatives from nonprofits who solve social problems. There is a love triangle that already exists that we need to maximize on. Our mayor saw our concern for our community. We had a nightclub across the street where a young man was shot and shot in the back and was paralyzed and was backed by drug dealers. And I told my congregation, the community, we don't want this. They told me, Pastor, keep your mouth shut because this is a drug-backed nightclub and you could get killed. I said, greater is he that is in me than he that's in the world. I got to say something. Then there were failing schools in our community that were not servicing our kids, and we decided we were going to build a separate 501c3 to deal with that wall that I was talking about between church and state. And so in order for the state to help us to start a charter school, we had to get a separate 501c3, and we started with one grade in our children's building, and that school went on to build another grade and another grade and another grade until we graduated in the 12th grade, 133 students, and now there's 5 Power Center Academy schools, thanks to Derwin Cisnat, because we had a kingdom-minded mindset, because we wanted to transform our community. And so when the mayor saw our concern for the community, he came back and he said, can y'all do something about that ugly apartment down there that's blight in that community? I said, can we do something? We have a kingdom vision. And so we just reminded him that we had a vision to sustain and build a livable, walkable community where people can be empowered, mind, body, and soul. And we came up with a concept called Eden Square. And Eden Square, this place would hold our charter school. It would hold affordable housing for people who could not afford to pay rent. It would hold a wellness center for people who had sedentary lifestyles and were not able to walk the community. We had an urban garden plan right there where grandmothers can sit on the front porch and watch the garden, because it's been proven in Chicago that when you have mothers watching urban gardens, it creates a front porch effect where people can't just come in and take advantage of the neighborhood because somebody's watching your tail. We also had a vision for a grocery store because of the food desert that exists in Hickory Hill. And also an urban garden concept where I told you where people raise their own fruits and vegetables and they will sell them to local restaurants and put them in that grocery store right here in Eden Square. I'm reminded of what God told Ezekiel in Ezekiel 36 and 33. He says that place where everybody said was desolate and that nobody would want to come back there, that place where everybody gave up on, he says, after I cleanse you, that place will be re-inhabited. That place will have a vineyard for every person, and every person will have their own well. That place that people drove by and said nobody wants to be there, that place will be called the Garden of Eden. And in Eden Square, we believe that we're going to transform a community by working together. In this picture, you see our groundbreaking we just had a few months ago. And in this picture is Mayor A.C. Warden. In this picture is our councilman. In this picture is our architect. In this picture is our charter school manager, Derwin Cisnat. In this picture is pastors and elders digging in the ground together, because if we can get this, can you dig it? If we can do this together, politicians, pastors, architects, if we can dig in together into our communities, that place that people gave up on, that place that the talented 10th left in exile, surely we who are privileged, we who have been empowered, we who have been set free, can have a connection and compassion to our communities, because injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere. No man is an island unto himself. We're all in this together. It's a love triangle. You can't leave me. I can't leave you. We might as well work together. And I just believe that if we work together, we can build a sustainable community where people can experience life as God intended it to be. Thank you.